I got a call from the bank. Your wife is here with someone who looks just like you. I told them it couldn't be true, she was with her sick mom. They asked me to come in right away. Have you ever been so utterly betrayed that the person you loved most called the cops on you and watched you get cuffed inside your own home? I came back from deployment, still in uniform, duffel cutting into my shoulder, thinking I'd finally breathe. One turn of the key and my front door opened to 2 officers in my living room. Behind them, my wife didn't run to me. She stared through me, lifted her hand and said with a voice I barely recognized, "That's him." Cold steel bit into my wrist. Click. Right there on my own welcome mat. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I memorized everything, every single detail because lies are loud, but the truth always leaves a trail. Tell me your state in the comments and keep listening because the first clue was standing 3 houses down. Let me rewind to the part that matters. The moment before my life snapped. I walked out of that airport and I swear I still had sand in my boots, still had the dust of another country in my lungs. Even though the ground under me was polished tile, not desert, and the air smelled like spilled coffee and cleaning supplies. For 12 long months, my brain had been trained to look for threats. But here, people were laughing, checking baggage, scrolling phones like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. I tried to copy them. I couldn't. I kept expecting to see Jolene's face in the crowd, her on her toes, that relieved smile she used to wear when she was trying not to cry. She told me she couldn't make it to the terminal, said she had something to handle and she'd be home. I believed her. Because that's what husbands do when they're tired and they miss their bed. My truck sat in long-term parking, covered in a layer of dust, like time had been stacking up on it. I wiped a line across the hood, turned the key, and the engine coughed to life. "All right," I muttered, the word feeling foreign in my throat. "Home." Then I glanced at my phone. No new messages. No, "Drive safe." No, "Can't wait." Just silence. And it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a warning riding shotgun. That silence stayed with me as I drove, heavier than my duffel bag. I told myself she was busy. Or nervous. Or asleep. I kept making excuses, the way a man does when he doesn't want to imagine the worst. My town came up like an old song. Same tune but now with a different, unsettling meaning. The streets were familiar but the details felt off. A new sign on the burger place. Fresh paint on a fence they used to peel. A couple of kids cutting across a yard like they owned the world. Life had just kept moving while I was gone, and I was the only one trying to step back into a paused moment. When my street appeared, my hands tightened on the wheel without permission. The house looked the same from the curb. 2 stories, white trim, a lawn that badly needed a cut. I parked, grabbed my duffel, and stood on the porch longer than I meant to, breathing deep like I could steady the universe with my lungs. 1 key. 1 turn. The lock gave way. The door swung open and the air inside felt wrong. Too still. Faintly sweet like someone had been trying to cover a smell. My eyes dropped to the floor first. 2 pairs of black boots were standing on my hardwood. Not mine. And in that moment, I knew whatever was waiting inside that house wasn't a welcome home. Those black boots weren't moving because the men wearing them were already watching me, like I'd walked into a scene they'd rehearsed. 2 officers stood in my living room, hands near their belts, faces flat, like they'd done this 1,000 times. Then I saw Jolene. She was behind them in a silk robe, eyes red and puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. But something about it didn't feel like genuine grief. Felt arranged. She wrapped her arms around herself and spoke in that shaky voice I used to fall for. "I'm scared of you, Edwin." I actually laughed once, quiet, confused. Scared of me? I just got home. One officer stepped slightly between us. Jolene swallowed hard, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. "He threatened me while he was overseas. I have the text. I'm afraid of what he'll do." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "Show me." That's when I caught movement outside. Through the front window, half shadowed by the oak tree, Derek Hale stood in my yard. Still as a fence post. Watching. Like this was the payoff. And in that second everything clicked. This wasn't panic. This was choreography. The click in my head hadn't even finished echoing when the older officer said, calm as cool weather, "Sir, turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Every muscle in me wanted to demand answers. Every part of me wanted to step past them and look Jolene in the eye until the lie broke. But training has a way of taking over when the world goes sideways. You don't escalate. You assess. You survive. So I turned. The cuffs came out like they'd been waiting in his pocket for this exact moment. Cold metal. Tight bite. Click. My wrists pulled together, and suddenly I wasn't a husband coming home. I was a problem being handled. The younger officer started reading me my rights, but his voice sounded far away like a radio turned down low. Jolene stood there with that practiced tremble, staring at the floor like she couldn't bear to see what she'd done. They walked me out through my own front door. The late afternoon sun hit my face, bright and normal, like the neighborhood didn't notice a man getting dismantled. Through the cruiser window I saw it. My duffel bag. Still sitting just inside the doorway where I dropped it. Home. Left behind. And I was the one being taken away. The station felt nothing like home. It was fluorescent light and stale air, disinfectant trying to cover old sweat, old fear. They walked me through a hallway that sounded too loud under my boots, then told me to empty my pockets, belt, shoelaces, phone. Like stripping a man down to the parts that can't run or fight back. Fingerprint ink smeared across my skin. A camera flashed in my face. I'd worn a uniform for a year, but in that room I was treated like the uniform meant nothing, like it made me more dangerous, not more disciplined. They sat me in an interview chair bolted to the floor, metal table cold under my forearms. A detective leaned in, pen ready. Did you threaten your wife while you were overseas? No. One word. Flat. Clean. The only truth that mattered? He asked again like repetition could rewrite reality. I didn't give him anything to twist. Just dates. Just facts. Near dawn, a different officer slid papers at me like a favor. You're free to go. Relief hit, then died when I read the line that mattered. A temporary restraining order. Freedom, yes, but on a leash. They told me to sign not because I agreed but because the system likes signatures. A signature is a corner you can be pushed into. I stared at the page, at Jolene's shaky handwriting, and all I could think was how steady her finger had looked when she pointed at me. Sign it anyway, the officer said like he was talking about a parking ticket. Court date in 2 weeks. Sort it out then. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of being a stranger to my own life. When I stepped outside, the morning air should have felt good. It didn't. It felt like I'd walked out of a cage into a bigger one. And there, parked at the curb, was Mark, my brother, leaning against his truck with his arms folded, jaw tight. He didn't ask questions in front of the building. He just opened the passenger door like it was the most normal thing in the world. Halfway down the road, he finally said, "You okay?" I stared out the window. Houses, driveways, flags, normal life. No, I said. Not even close. It feels like I got shot in the back and I'm the one bleeding in public. Mark's couch wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't mine. And that was the point. I lay there staring at his ceiling fan, cutting slow circles through the dark, listening to the house settle and creak like it was breathing without me. Every time I started to drift, my mind snapped back to Jolene's face at the doorway. Not the tears. Not the shaking voice. The moment before all that, when she looked right through me and lifted her hand like I was a stranger she wanted removed. That part was ice cold. The kind of look you give a man you've already decided to bury. I kept replaying every call from overseas, every love you, every laugh that sounded real at the time. And one question wouldn't leave me alone. Who did I marry? Or maybe worse, when did she stop being mine? Anger tried to rise, loud and useless. I pushed it down. Yelling doesn't fix paperwork. Breaking things doesn't erase a restraining order. I needed something stronger than emotion. Proof. I sat up in the dark and whispered it like a vow. I'm not going to scream. I'm going to build a case. From the hallway, Mark's voice came soft but solid. Get some sleep. Tomorrow morning we're getting you a lawyer. Morning came thin and gray. Mark handed me coffee like it was medicine. And we drove downtown without music, without small talk, just tires on pavement and that heavy quiet men use when words won't help. Frank Whitmore's office sat above a storefront that used to be something else, like half the buildings in our town. Inside it smelled like paper and old wood. Frank himself was the same. Plain, steady, no flash. He shook my hand once, firm, then sat back and said, "Start from the beginning." So I did. Deployment dates. Video calls. The drive home. The cops in my living room. Jolene's texts. Derek in the yard. I expected interruption. Maybe judgment. Frank didn't give me either. He just wrote every time, every date, every name. Like he was building a map out of my mess. When I finished, he tapped his pen and looked me dead in the eye. Facts only. No feelings. Court doesn't care how bad it hurts. He told me he'd request every piece of evidence Jolene used to get that restraining order. Messages. Screenshots. Statements. We fight their story with records. I nodded, then surprised myself. I want a meeting, I said. Her, me, both attorneys. I want to look at her when she repeats the lie. Frank's eyes narrowed just a touch. All right, he said. Then we do it smart. Frank didn't raise his voice when he warned me, but the way he said it made my skin tighten. Preserve everything, he said. Evidence has a habit of disappearing the moment it becomes useful. On the drive back to Mark's, that sentence kept looping in my head. Preserve. Disappear. Useful. That's when I remembered the cameras. Not some fancy setup, just a basic security system I'd put in before I left. Front door. Garage. Backyard. I told myself it was for Jolene's peace of mind while I was overseas. Now it might be for my survival. At Mark's place, I went straight to his garage and dug through a stack of boxes until I found my old backup laptop. Dust coated the lid like it hadn't been touched since I deployed. I wiped it clean with my sleeve, plugged it in, and watched the screen glow to life. My heart wasn't pounding like fear. It was pounding like anticipation, like the moment before you open a door you know you can't close again. I logged into the cloud archive and pulled up the timeline. Day after day, night after night. Then I dragged the cursor into the hours people think nobody's watching. The first clips were boring. Delivery drivers. Neighborhood kids chasing a ball into my yard. Jolene coming home with grocery bags. Looking normal, like she wasn't building a lie in my absence. For a second, I almost felt stupid, like I'd been chasing shadows. Then I saw the timestamp. 2:13 a.m. The garage door lifted halfway, slow and quiet. A figure slipped inside like he belonged there. The camera caught his face when he turned. Derek Hale. Not in daylight, not waving over a fence. In the middle of the night. Entering my house through my garage. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I checked the next week. 2:17 a.m. Derek again. The next month. 2:11 a.m. Derek again. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't helping out. It was routine. And the worst part? He punched the keypad like he'd done it 100 times. Meaning someone gave him the code. I clicked another clip and there she was. Jolene. Opening the door from the inside, stepping close, letting him in with that casual, familiar ease. My hands started to shake. Not from anger. Something colder. She didn't just betray me, I whispered. She practiced. I didn't sit there and spiral. I didn't stare at the screen like a wounded man, hoping the truth would change if I blinked. I went into a place I knew well. Mission mode. I downloaded every clip that mattered and named them by timestamp. Clean and brutal. 2025318_213. 2025407_217. 2025502_11. No emotions. No opinions. Just time, date, and a man entering my home like it was his. Then I copied everything onto a separate drive, encrypted it, and made a second backup. Because once you learn someone can lie with a straight face, you stop trusting luck. You start trusting redundancy. I emailed Frank a secure link and followed up with a short message. Garage entries, multiple nights, keypad used. She let him in. Mark watched from the doorway, quiet. He didn't ask what I was feeling because the answer was obvious. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shouting. I felt cold, like my blood had been replaced with ice water. And in that cold, one thought settled in hard. Jolene could say whatever she wanted, but now she couldn't just say it. Frank called the next morning. We're meeting them at your house, he said. You'll be there with me. That's the only way I agreed to it. Hearing him say, your house, sounded strange. Because legally it was still mine, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place I'd been banned from, like some kind of hazard. We pulled up mid-morning. The sun was out. Birds were loud. Normal life doing what it always does. I stepped onto my own walkway and felt like I needed permission from the air. My chest tightened the closer I got to the porch. Inside, the house looked familiar in shape. Only the framed wedding photo that used to sit by the hallway was gone. The little set of keys on the hook by the door gone. Furniture shifted just enough to say, I changed things while you were away. And the smell, God, the smell. Jolene's cinnamon air freshener was still there, but underneath it was something sharper. A man's cologne. Not mine. My jaw locked. I followed Frank into the kitchen and sat at the oak table we'd bought together, the table where we used to talk about someday. Now it was a courtroom with no judge, just my life laid out like evidence, waiting to be attacked. We waited at that kitchen table long enough for the silence to start feeling like a tactic. Frank checked his watch once and didn't say a word. He didn't have to. In my marriage, Jolene was never late. She was making you wait. When the front door finally opened, I heard heels first. Slow. Deliberate. Jolene walked in like she was showing up for an interview, not a betrayal. Cream blouse, hair neat, eyes already glossy. Behind her came Derek, close enough to be comfortable, bold enough to place a hand on her shoulder like he belonged in my house more than I did. Their attorney cleared his throat and started smooth. My client is here in good faith, but she remains fearful for her safety. Jolene nodded on cue. Edwin has a temper, she said softly, like she was confessing something painful. The military. It changed him. I felt heat rise into my neck. Not rage, something uglier being measured and labeled by the person who knew me best. Derek stood there watching me, waiting for me to snap so he could say, "See." I kept my hands flat on the table. I kept my voice in my throat. I looked straight at Jolene and let her talk herself deeper into the lie, because the longer she acted, the cleaner my timing would be. Frank didn't rush. He let the room fill with Jolene's careful little story until it sounded almost believable. Almost. Then he nodded at me once, subtle like a green light. I opened the folder in front of me and slid a single photo across the table. It stopped right in front of Jolene's attorney, face up, clean, sharp, timestamp printed at the bottom. That's Derek, I said, voice steady. In my garage, 2:13 a.m. while I was overseas. Derek leaned forward with a half smirk like he'd practiced this too. I was helping her out, he said. Maintenance issues. She was alone. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Jolene. At 2 in the morning? I asked, quiet enough to be polite, sharp enough to cut. That's when you fix a sticking garage door? For the first time, Jolene's performance faltered. Not the tears. Those stayed. But her blink rate changed fast, uneven, like her brain was searching for the next line and not finding it where she expected. Frank set down a second page, another timestamp, another entry. There are more, he said calmly. And the air in that kitchen shifted. Not toward reconciliation. Toward consequences. Frank didn't argue with their excuses. He just kept laying facts down like weights, one after another, until the table felt heavy. He slid out a set of still frames from the street-facing camera. Derek's truck parked overnight, not once. Not a weird coincidence. Over and over, different dates, same story. Then he placed a printout of the keypad access log beside it. Clean columns, repeated entries, the code being used like a routine, not an emergency. Their attorney tried to salvage it with a gentle voice. She was alone. He was helping with security. A woman shouldn't be judged for accepting help. Frank didn't even blink. We're not judging her fear, he said. We're documenting trespass and a consistent pattern of unauthorized access to my client's home while he was deployed. That word pattern hit harder than any insult. Because a pattern means intent. Means planning. It means this wasn't a lonely mistake. It was a system. Jolene's cheeks flushed. Her voice rose, losing its softness. You're twisting everything. You always do that, Edwin. You make me look crazy. Derek's hand stayed on her shoulder, steady like a claim. And I realized they weren't here to explain. They were here to win. Jolene stood up so fast her chair scraped the tile, sharp and ugly. You left me for a year, she snapped, the tears suddenly gone, replaced by something raw. You abandoned me. You don't get to come back and act like a hero and judge me. I felt my pulse thump once hard. I kept my voice low because I wouldn't give her the scene she wanted. I deployed, I said. I didn't abandon you. Derek shifted behind her like he was the one protecting her now, like my home was his territory and I was the intruder. That image, him standing there in my kitchen, did something to me. It didn't make me violent. It made me clear. I looked at Jolene and said it clean so nobody could pretend they misunderstood. You don't get to turn me into a monster to cover up your betrayal. You don't get to steal my name because you made choices you can't defend. For a second, the room went quiet. Even their attorney stopped shuffling paper. Jolene's eyes narrowed and the last bit of her mask slid back into place. She leaned in just enough for the threat to feel private. You're going to regret this, she said. And I believed her because that wasn't anger. That was confidence. Frank walked me to the front door like he was escorting me out of a minefield. His voice stayed level, but the deadline in it was sharp. Tomorrow morning, he said. I file the motion to dismiss the restraining order. After that, they'll know we're not bluffing. On the drive back to Mark's, Jolene's last words kept replaying. You're going to regret this. It sat in my chest like a weight. Not fear exactly, more like a countdown. I could feel the clock ticking even when the car was quiet. That night, I spread everything across Mark's kitchen table. Screenshots, timestamps, logs, printouts, stacked and labeled like an operation brief. I wasn't doing this because I wanted drama. I was doing it because I wanted my life back. And in this kind of fight, the man with the cleaner file survives. It hit me then. Overseas, the battlefield was obvious. Here, the battlefield wore a robe and cried on command. Mark leaned against the counter watching me work. Keep your head cool, he said. Don't let them bait you. I didn't look up. I'm trying, I said. But I'm out of patience and tomorrow we stop playing defense. The week that followed felt longer than the whole flight home. Every morning, I woke up on Mark's couch with the same tightness in my chest, like my body remembered the handcuffs before my mind did. I ran on coffee and routine. Shower, paperwork, calls with Frank, then back to the files. No social media. No updates. No venting to buddies. In a small town, the moment you talk, your story stops being yours. Frank kept moving behind the scenes. Requests. Records. Subpoenas. While I sat in that forced silence, waiting for the court date like it was a storm you can see coming but can't outrun. On day 5, Frank called me mid-afternoon. His tone had shifted. Less legal, more tactical. We need financial digging, he said. Affairs leave trails. So do setups. Like what? I asked even though I already knew the answer. Hidden accounts, hotel charges, cash withdrawals, anything that shows planning. There was a pause, then he added, I'm bringing in a private investigator, Elena Cruz. The name didn't mean anything to me yet, but the way Frank said it did, like he just handed me a new tool. And for the first time all week, I felt the balance start to tilt. Elena Cruz didn't walk in like a helper. She walked in like a hunter. No, sorry you're dealing with this. No small talk. Just a quick scan of my face, then the file Frank handed her. Money always leaves tracks, she said. People can lie all day. Their statements don't. We sat in Frank's office, but Elena owned the space the second she opened her notebook. She asked for access to our shared accounts like she was asking for a flashlight in a dark room. I hesitated, not because I had anything to hide, but because giving a stranger the keys to my finances felt like admitting my life wasn't mine right now. Still, I slid the login across the desk. The shame came in quiet. I'd been overseas sending money home, trusting Jolene with everything, trusting her with my name, my house, my peace. Now I was signing into my own marriage like it was a crime scene. Elena caught the look on my face. Don't do that, she said. Not harsh, just real. Don't be embarrassed because you loved your wife. I swallowed. She tapped the folder once. Put that feeling where it belongs. Not into pride. Into proof. Anger is useless unless it builds something. And I felt my focus lock back in. 3 days later, Elena called like she was reading a weather alert. I found it. I drove over and she laid the papers out in clean lines. Bank statements, transaction histories, highlighted entries that looked small until you understood what they meant. Second checking account, she said, opened 6 months after you deployed. Regular cash deposits, regular cash withdrawals. Same rhythm, same week. That's not random. I stared at the numbers and felt my jaw tighten. There's a special kind of hurt in realizing your marriage had a budget you didn't know about. Then she slid another page forward. Hotel charges. Same place. Same pattern. Lakeview Inn, Elena said. Twice a month, always Tuesday. Tuesday. My mind snapped straight back to Jolene on video calls, smiling like a loyal wife. Yoga tonight, she used to say, trying to stay healthy. I even told her I was proud of her. I even sent money for it once. A dry laugh slipped out of me, bitter and sharp. Yoga, I said. So that's what she called room 212. Elena didn't react. She just nodded. This isn't only cheating, Edwin. It's planning. And planning is something courts understand. And I knew we'd just found the spine of her lie. Elena didn't ask me to come with her. That's the kind of mercy you don't notice until later. She went to the Lakeview Inn alone, dressed plain, voice soft, like she was just another person with a question and a little patience. She told me later the lobby smelled like cheap lemon cleaner and old carpet. Nothing romantic. Nothing dramatic. Just ordinary. That's what made it sting. She showed the front desk clerk a photo of Jolene, then Derek. Have you seen these two? She asked, calm as a Sunday. The clerk didn't even hesitate. Oh yeah, she said. They come in all the time. Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Elena got the details without pushing. Same room. Same schedule. Same routine. Room 212. Tuesdays. Like they'd built a life inside a motel and called it normal. When Elena told me, I felt my chest go hollow. Not rage. Not tears. Just the quiet, devastating understanding that there was nothing left to save. Whatever I'd been hoping for died clean. Frank listened on speaker, then said almost to himself, good. That's independent confirmation. We're building a case they can't talk their way out of. That night, Elena asked one question that sounded harmless. Do you and Jolene share any devices? A tablet, maybe? I almost said no. Then I remembered the old iPad we'd kept on the kitchen counter for bills, recipes, video calls. I'd shoved it into a box before I deployed and forgot about it like you forget anything that belonged to your normal life. I dug it out at Mark's place, powered it on, and watched it light up like nothing had changed. Elena's eyes stayed sharp. People delete messages, she said, tapping through menus. They forget the cloud keeps copies, drafts, backups, autosaves. A minute later she stopped moving. Here, she said. On the screen was a draft email, never sent, but never erased. One line hit me like a punch. Make sure you're here at 6. He lands at 5. I read it again, slower, feeling cold crawl up my spine. It wasn't just cheating. It was coordination. Timing. A plan. I looked at Elena. She scripted my homecoming, I said. Elena nodded once. This, she said quietly, is your smoking gun. And suddenly, I understood why Jolene had sounded so confident when she said I'd regret it. Frank moved fast once we had the tablet draft. It changed the temperature of everything. No more, he said, she said. Now we had a plan in her own words, and Frank treated it like live ammo. He stacked the file the way a man stacks weight plates. Deployment duty logs, carrier call records, security footage, bank statements, hotel charges. Elena took all of it and built what she called an airtight narrative. Not just proof, but a story that made sense to a judge who'd never met any of us. The night before court, I laid my suit out on Mark's chair. Not my uniform. The uniform had gotten me cuffed. This was a different kind of armor. In the bathroom mirror, I looked older than when I left. Not weaker. Just sharpened. I tightened my tie and said it out loud, quiet like a prayer. Today I get my name back. Outside, the air had that early morning bite. Mark drove. Frank followed in his own car. Nobody joked. Nobody filled the silence. We didn't need to. When I walked into the courthouse, I didn't shake. I'd been afraid of bullets. I wasn't going to fear paperwork. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but it carried weight. Polished wood, old flags, the kind of quiet that makes every cough sound guilty. I sat beside Frank at our table and kept my hands visible, calm, like I had nothing to hide. Because I didn't. Jolene was already there, sitting in the front row with Derek. Their shoulders touched like they were a couple who belonged in public. That tiny detail hit harder than the hotel charges. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She just didn't want me to notice. Or maybe she did. When the judge walked in, the room tightened. She had that look. Sharp eyes, no patience for theater, the kind of person you can't charm if the facts aren't on your side. Frank stood. Your Honor, we're requesting dismissal of the restraining order. The allegations are fabricated, and we have records that prove it. Jolene's attorney rose immediately. My client is terrified. Mr. Hartwell has a violent temper. She fears for her safety. The judge didn't react. She just leaned forward a fraction and said, flat and final, then we're going to see the evidence. Proceed. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted away from tears and toward truth. Frank didn't pace. He didn't perform. He built a wall, one brick at a time, until there was nowhere left for Jolene's story to stand. First, my duty roster. Dates and locations stamped by the military, not by my memory. Frank pointed to the exact days Jolene claimed I threatened her. Mr. Hartwell was overseas, he said. On duty verified. Then the carrier logs went up. A clean record of my number. No calls, no texts in the windows she swore happened. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't debatable. It was absence documented. After that, Frank played the video. The courtroom screen showed Derek walking into my garage at 2:13 a.m. like it was normal, like it was his. The sound of the garage door rolling up filled the room and I felt every head turn. Then came the draft email from the shared tablet. Frank read it slow, letting each word land. Everything needs to look exactly like we discussed. I will make sure he is here at 6. You be there at 5. I looked at Jolene. Her face stayed stiff, trained, but her hands didn't lie. Her fingers were locked tight, knuckles pale, like she was gripping the last edge of control. And I realized she wasn't scared of me. She was scared of the records. When it was their turn, Jolene's attorney stood up with the kind of confidence that comes from habit, not truth. He cleared his throat and said, Your Honor, my client may have misremembered certain dates due to stress, trauma, PTSD. Frank didn't move. He didn't need to. The judge cut in, voice calm but sharp. Misremembered dates? She lifted the phone log printout slightly like it weighed nothing. Then explain the logs. Explain why there are no calls during the alleged incidents. Jolene's attorney opened his mouth, then closed it. Derek stared straight ahead like he'd suddenly found religion. Jolene kept her eyes on the table, blinking too fast. The judge leaned back, took off her glasses, and looked at them the way a grown woman looks at a childish lie. The pause stretched just long enough for my heart to start hammering again. Then the gavel came down. One clean crack that sounded like air returning to my lungs. "Restraining order dissolved," she said. "Insufficient grounds. Lack of credible evidence." I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. Slow, deep, like a man surfacing after being held underwater. For the first time since I got home, my name wasn't a weapon in someone else's hand. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt too bright for what had just happened. Mark wrapped an arm around my shoulder and squeezed once. No words, just that simple brother language that says, "You're not alone." For a few seconds, I let myself believe it was over. I let myself enjoy the quiet relief of walking without looking over my shoulder. Elena didn't let me stay there. She stepped close and spoke low. "Men like Derek, women like Jolene, they don't lose once and go home," she said. "They double down. They look for a new angle." I nodded like I understood, but part of me still wanted to be done. I wanted to just wake up and sleep in a life that didn't revolve around court dates. Then Jolene walked past us on the courthouse steps. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look heartbroken. She looked calculating, like she was already moving pieces in her head. Derek glanced at me over her shoulder, a tight little smirk that said he thought he'd gotten away clean. My stomach tightened again. I watched them reach their car, whisper something to each other, and drive off like they were the wronged ones. That's when I knew the gavel wasn't the ending. It was just one chapter closing. Jolene's eyes had promised a second storm, and I could feel it building already. The next morning started almost normal. Mark was in the kitchen making coffee, the smell filling the house like a small comfort. I was halfway through my first mug when my phone lit up with Frank's name. His voice was tight. "Edwin, listen to me. Jolene filed an emergency motion this morning." I sat up straight. "For what?" "She's claiming you assaulted her during that sit-down meeting at your house," he said. "She says you grabbed her when Derek and I weren't in the room." My mouth went dry. "That never happened. You were there. Elena was there." "I know," Frank said. "But she submitted photos. He emailed them while we were on the call." I opened the file and my stomach dropped. Bruises on her ribs. Dark marks on her arms. Close-up shots staged to look ugly and immediate. "That's impossible," I said, staring at the screen like it could be a trick of light. "She's lying." Frank didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. The silence told me what he was thinking. Photos make judges nervous, even fake ones. Then the doorbell rang, cheerful, upbeat like a joke. I walked to the peephole and felt the blood leave my face. A sheriff's deputy stood on the porch, hand resting on his belt, waiting like he had all day. And just like that, the truth didn't matter anymore. Only the accusation did. I didn't make the deputy force his way in. I opened the door myself, slow and steady, like my hands belonged to a man with nothing to hide. "I'm calling my attorney," I said, keeping my voice flat. Not rude. Not scared. Just facts. He nodded like he'd heard it 100 times. I grabbed my phone, texted Frank one line, "They're here again," then stepped onto the porch. Mark hovered behind me, jaw clenched, the kind of helpless anger only family carries. I walked to the cruiser without arguing, without putting on a show. That's what Jolene wanted, a scene she could sell later. I wasn't giving her one. Inside the car, the vinyl seat stuck to the back of my shirt. The radio crackled with codes I didn't recognize. Street signs slid past like déjà vu. It felt like I was rewinding my life to the first arrest, like none of my truth had mattered. That's when I understood the real point of this move. It wasn't just to scare me. It was to grind me down until I snapped. Until I said one dumb sentence they could frame. I stared out the window and repeated it like a prayer. Stay frosty. Don't give them what they need. At the station, they didn't toss me in a cell this time. They put me in a bright little room that smelled like cleaner and old coffee. Polite. Procedural. Almost humane. That's how they do it when they want you to relax and slip up. An officer set up a camera and told me to hold out my hands. Palms up, palms down, fingers spread, close-ups of knuckles, wrists, nail beds, looking for marks, bruises, anything that could say you hit somebody. There was nothing because I hadn't touched her, not once. I sat there with my hands folded, watching them document my innocence like it was suspicious. The longer it took, the more I felt that cold pressure in my chest. This system didn't run on what you know. It runs on what you can prove. Frank arrived like a man walking into a fire he'd already mapped. He didn't waste time on greetings. "Show me the photo she submitted," he demanded. The detective slid a folder across the table. Frank flipped through it fast. I watched his eyes narrow. The bruises looked real, but something about them felt wrong. Too clean. Too placed. Like they were meant to be seen. Frank leaned in close and spoke under his breath. "We're not just fighting her story now," he said. "We're finding the flaw in these pictures." They let me go before dinner. No charges yet, but the damage was done anyway. Frank met me in the lobby and handed me the updated paperwork like it was a new set of cuffs. "Temporary restraining order is back in place," he said, "until we knock this down." I walked out of that building feeling smaller than when I'd walked in. Not because I believed Jolene, but because I knew how quickly a lie becomes procedure. How fast a photo can outrun the truth. Mark drove me home in silence. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. I'd come home from a war zone expecting relief. Instead, I was learning a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from being accused and having no place to put your name down and rest. Back at Mark's, I dropped onto the couch and finally said what had been sitting in my throat all day. "Over there," I murmured. I always knew who the enemy was. Mark didn't hesitate. "At home," he said, "the enemy wears a mask." My phone buzzed. Elena's name. Her voice came through crisp and focused. "I'm going over the photos now," she said. "And Edwin? Something's off." For the first time since the deputy rang the bell, a thin line of hope slipped back in. Elena put the call on speaker so Frank could hear too. You could tell she'd been staring at those bruises for a while. The way her voice got quieter when she was certain. "These marks," she said, "they don't look like a grab. A grab leaves uneven pressure, finger spacing, thumb placement, bruising that wraps. This looks more like someone pressed into a hard edge. A door frame. A countertop corner. Something straight." I felt heat flood my face, not relief. Anger. A cold, clean anger that finally had a target. "So she staged it," I said, and my voice sounded unfamiliar even to me. "There's more," Elena continued. I pulled the metadata. "The photos were taken yesterday morning, but her affidavit claims the bruises showed up right after your meeting, 3 days ago." She paused. "Bruises change. Color shifts. These don't match that timeline." Mark let out a low breath like a growl. Frank didn't react the way most people do. He got calmer. "That's our crack," he said. "That's how we turn this around." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "She's still lying," I said almost to myself. "Even after court." Frank's voice stayed level, but it hit like a command. "Good," he said. "Because now we stop defending." "Now we're not defending a lie," Frank said. "We're exposing a crime." And suddenly the whole case shifted from me surviving her story to her surviving the truth. Frank moved like a man who'd finally found the weak point in a door. That same afternoon he filed for an independent medical exam and demanded the original devices used to take Jolene's photos. Phone, cloud account, everything. "If she's lying," he told me, "the truth is sitting in the data. We just have to force it into the light." Elena went deeper. Not just bank statements and emails now. Full cloud backup, hidden folders, anything most people forget exists. The kind of digging that feels less like detective work and more like archaeology. Every click was a shovel. I sat by Mark's window and watched rain slide down the glass in long, crooked lines. The street outside looked peaceful. Lawns, mailboxes, warm porch lights. Yet I felt haunted. Like any second, another lie could knock on the door and drag me back into that station. My phone buzzed. One text from Elena. No greeting. No extra words. Found something else. We have her cold. My heart kicked hard like it remembered every alarm I ever heard overseas. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. Mark looked over. "What is it?" I stared at the screen, pulse in my throat. "I don't know yet," I said. "But whatever it is, it ends this." Elena showed up that night with a laptop and a look I hadn't seen on her before. Quiet satisfaction. She didn't sit down right away. She just opened the screen, plugged in a drive and said, "You need to hear this." Frank came over and Mark stood behind me like a wall. Elena clicked play. Jolene's voice filled the room. Clear, steady, almost casual, not scared, not trembling, practiced. "Cry," she said. "Say you're afraid. Keep it simple. Have the photos ready. If they ask questions, just repeat, 'You're scared.' That's it." My stomach turned. The words weren't emotional. They were instructions. Like she was walking someone through a recipe. Then Jolene continued, laying it out step by step. Timing. What to say. When to show bruises. How to frame me as unstable because of the military. Hearing my life reduced to a script made my skin crawl. I felt cold spread up the back of my neck like I'd been standing in a dark room too long. I paused the audio and stared at Elena. This is real. Elena nodded. Pulled from the backup, original metadata intact. Frank's face didn't change, but his eyes hardened. That's not evidence, Frank said quietly. That's her voice killing her own story. He closed the laptop gently like it was dangerous. We're taking this into mediation, he said. And we're going to make them fall apart with their own words. Mediation was set for the following week. Same courthouse complex, different room, different rules. It wasn't a trial, but it felt like one of those back rooms where men decide whether you get your life back or keep bleeding out on paperwork. Frank called it their chosen stage. Jolene wanted a setting where she could cry and posture without a jury staring through it. We got there early. Fluorescent lights. Cheap coffee smell. A long table with water pitchers nobody touched. I sat with my hands folded, steady, and listened to the hum of the air vent like it was counting down. Jolene arrived 5 minutes late again. She wore pale colors, hair soft, face carefully tired. Derek walked in beside her like a man who thought the worst was over. He gave me a quick look that said, "You couldn't even keep your own house." The mediator, a retired judge type, cleared his throat. "This is not a trial," he said. "But statements made here can be recorded and referenced." Frank didn't look at them. He looked at me. "No heat," he said quietly. "Let them hang themselves." I nodded once. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to end it." And the room went still right before the storm. Frank opened like he always did. No drama. No speeches. He slid the evidence across the table in a clean sequence. Security footage of Derek entering my garage in the middle of the night, keypad logs showing repeated access, my deployment records, carrier logs, then the bank statements, and the hotel charges with the same Tuesday pattern. Jolene's attorney tried to laugh it off. "None of this proves an assault," he said. "It proves nothing about fear." Frank didn't flinch. "It proves motive," he replied. "It proves deception, and it proves a coordinated narrative." Elena leaned in and placed her report down like a blade. "The bruising pattern is inconsistent with a grab," she said. "And the photo metadata doesn't match the claim timeline. These were taken later." Jolene's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked to Derek, then to the mediator like she was searching for an exit that wasn't there. Her voice came out thin. "That's not..." I waited until the room was tight enough to snap. Then I slid one last page forward. The tablet draft. I tapped the line with my finger. "Everything needs to look exactly like we discussed." And suddenly, nobody at that table could pretend this was just misunderstanding. Elena didn't make a speech. She just turned her laptop slightly toward the center of the table and hit play. Jolene's voice filled the room. Clear, controlled, almost bored. "Cry," she said. "Say you're afraid. Keep it simple. Have the photos ready. If they ask questions, just repeat, 'You're scared.' That's it." I watched Derek as the words landed. The color drained out of his face in real time. His confident posture collapsed into something small, like a man realizing the trap was never meant for both of them, only him if it came to that. He glanced at Jolene, searching for a lifeline. She didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, like she could outlast the sound of her own voice. Then Derek cracked. "She told me to do it," he blurted, too loud for the room. "She planned it. The bruises, the timing, everything. I didn't think." Frank leaned forward, voice steady as a hammer. "Here's what happens," he said. "You withdraw every claim. You sign a settlement or we hand this to the DA as conspiracy and false reporting today." And for the first time, Jolene looked afraid because the script was gone. After that, time turned into paperwork, meetings, calls, hearings that lasted minutes but stole days from my life. The difference was the direction of the weight. Before everything pressed on my chest, now it pressed on theirs. Jolene signed what she had to sign. Fees, restitution, the kind of numbers that don't feel real until they hit your account. She moved out quietly, using the side door of her own choices. I didn't watch to feel good. I watched to believe it. Derek lost more than he expected. In a town like ours, people don't forget the guy who helped frame a deployed soldier. He stopped showing up at the places he used to own, barbecues, hardware store, Saturday morning coffee, because the looks were louder than words. When I finally got my house back, I changed every lock. Front, back, garage. I repainted the porch like I was sealing a wound. Each brushstroke felt like oxygen. One night, I found the old welcome home mat Jolene had picked out years ago. I carried it to the fire pit, lit a match, and watched the letters curl and blacken. No ceremony, just an ending that needed to happen. I used to think the scariest thing a man could face was overseas. Dust in your teeth, adrenaline in your veins, waiting for something you can't see. But I learned there's something colder than that. Having your good name taken from you in your own living room by the person who once knew how you took your coffee. I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I got mean. I won because I stopped begging to be understood and started fighting to be proven. That's the difference. Revenge is noise. Reclamation is quiet work. Records, timestamps, a clean timeline that no tears can erase. If there's one lesson I'll carry longer than any deployment, it's this. When someone tries to bend the truth with emotion, don't explode. Don't prove your innocence with anger. Build your file. Keep your head. Let the facts do the damage. Because justice doesn't shout. It doesn't flex. It stays. If this story hit you, tell me what state you're listening from and subscribe. I've got more stories where the truth wins, but only after it gets dragged through the mud first.